Hello and welcome to the NVR podcast, Season 2, Episode 2. I'm Rachael Aylmer.
And I'm Peter Jakob.
And today we're going to be talking about the parent's trauma. Tell me, Peter, how did we get to this topic?
Well, you said something earlier as we were chatting that kind of leads into this topic, isn't it? You said we often see the child's trauma. And indeed, maybe just under half the kids who tend to develop controlling, aggressive, violent, problematic, self-destructive behavior have experienced adverse circumstances. So there has been trauma in the lives of many children we see, or whose parents we see, but that often takes center stage in conversations about these children, and the parents' trauma often doesn't have so much space in these conversations. So, and of course in NVR, we primarily see the parents. So I think the parents' trauma, where parents do feel traumatized, is a real big issue.
I know often in screening consultations, it's my place to sometimes remind parents that NVR is about child-focused work and parent-centered. So we center, we center the work around the parents and focus on their coping and self-care and all the rest of it. So yeah, it can go unnoticed.
That's a wonderful description that you've just made of NVR. And I'm just thinking of the contrast of people speaking about doing child-centered work versus us doing parent-centered and child-focused work.
Focused.
Yeah. I really like that distinction.
Oh, I've been doing it for ages.
Yeah, have you? Okay, good.
She says, flicking her hair over her shoulder.
Okay, so if we position ourselves in a way that centers the parent and the parent's experience, of course, we have to deal with traumatic experiences of the parents. I was just thinking, I was reading an article from a German newspaper today about children who used to get sent to these institutions for 6 weeks over the summer when they weren't so well. And I mean, going back to the 60s and 70s, after which these institutions were closed, there were often very traumatizing experiences that the children had. So that was what this article was about. And people actually of my generation, perhaps a bit younger, who are now talking about this, wanting to see their distress legitimized, heard, taken seriously, in some instances looking for financial compensation. And what struck me was that they involved a psychologist whom you and I both know, Louise Schreiter. She was interviewed by the journalist as part of the article, and she asked her to just tell her what trauma is. And Louise spoke about it in a way that I think is very helpful, because she didn't speak about it in terms of a diagnosis, like a diagnosis of PTSD, nor did she speak about it in terms of there being anything wrong with the person. who is up against the challenge. She said, if you have memories and the way you remember or the kind of memories you have simply impact on you in a negative way. That was her definition of trauma. If they cause you distress, if they cause you harm. So it's a very wide, broad understanding of trauma, and it's not an understanding of trauma as an illness or a disorder or anything, but merely one of the person's experience. Something happened. Something happened.
The person's response to that experience.
Say again?
The person's response to that experience.
There's the response to that experience. I feel discomfort of some kind. It impacts on my life in some way that is negative. So I guess that's the kind of trauma that we're talking about. In some instances, parents might get diagnosed with something, PTSD or depression, or an anxiety disorder, or there might be that very unfortunate diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and so forth and so on, all of which are stigmatizing. So I just think it's important that we're clear that we're not in the business of putting stigmatizing labels on parents.
It can spread, I'm just thinking about my own interpretation of trauma, adult trauma. I went to the dentist and I'm traumatized by that experience and don't want to go back. So I think as we hear talking about on an NVR podcast, maybe the listeners' minds are going to, CPV, parents' trauma from the experience of the child, but mine is very different, but it's still as deep and as traumatic. So it's about the broader sense of experience of the response of that experience left me feeling traumatized and fear of. And then my head then, as you were talking, was thinking, it's okay, how do I overcome this trauma I experienced at the dentist? Many people say, feel the fear and face it anyway. I do not want to go back. I do not want to go back. So how do parents whose trauma is within their relationship with their young person and they're experiencing the trauma daily by their violence, there is not an escape, is there? I don't have to go to the dentist unless my teeth are really hurting me, but I can avoid it. I don't have to go there. I don't have to drive past. I don't even have to look. If I did drive past, I wouldn't look. I'd close my eyes. Parents don't have that option when their trauma is from perhaps the harmful and violent behaviours from their young person. So there's not an escape from that trauma, is there? I guess I'm just throwing that in there as a...
Well, you've brought up the A word, haven't you? Avoidance.
Yeah.
So you avoid going to the dentist, but also you described another kind of avoidance. You're driving past the dental surgery and you don't look at it. You're not even avoiding the part of town where the dental surgery is, but even when you're in that physical space, in the proximity to the dental surgery, you're looking away. So you can, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you put some music on the radio and start whistling or something, or start thinking about something else. So maybe you move into internal avoidance.
Yeah, it's like in my head, I start sort of saying out loud, I'm not looking at you, dental surgery, I'm not looking.
You don't exist. Yeah. But it's it's nonetheless very serious and
real.
And real. So we may have parents who have been very frightened by their child, who have felt very helpless in the face of what they have experienced as, an assault, what has been an assault. And some of these parents have also experienced something of that nature in the past. maybe in their own childhood, in their own adolescence, maybe with the child's birth father, or maybe with a later partner. And then we tend to speak of a multi-stressed family, a family where multiple stressors. I'm moving towards speaking of them as families with multiple challenges. Because even the word multi-stressed family is almost like a designation, like a classification.
Yeah, it feels a bit labelly, doesn't it?
Feels a bit what?
Labeled,
Labeled. Yeah, it feels labelly. Yeah, yeah. So we have these multiple challenges that parents are dealing with, and I mean, how often do we hear a parent say something like, and then he looks at me with those eyes, and those are his father's eyes. And somehow she doesn't actually fully see the child. Somehow she also sees the child's father. And what the child is doing brings back a lot of the feelings that she had before when she was, for example, subject to domestic abuse. And that's pretty serious. And as you said, how does she avoid that?
How does she escape that? How do you get he or she, it could be a father. How does a parent escape those feelings, even all for a moment?
Yeah.
It must be really, really hard.
Yeah.
I'm scratching my back.
Yeah. Has that thing got a little hand on it or something?
It has, yeah.
Really? You're kidding me?
No, sorry. Sorry, listeners. I got a back scratch with a little claw hand.
Okay. Yeah, on the one hand, there is no escape because there is the responsibility to parent. So it's very difficult to appreciate, I think, that psychologically there are two people in that one parent. On the one hand, there's the person who feels responsible for, and wants to care for the child, wants to give the child guidance, wants to help the child realize what it's like to be a moral and righteous person. And on the other hand, or on the other side, inside the same parent, there is the person who's afraid that if I say something and the child looks at me in a certain way, I will be terrified. And I might be reduced to that partner of a domestically violent person, or indeed, I might become the 7-year-old child that I once was emotionally when I experienced violence or some form of abuse in my own family of origin. We have these two conflicting ways of being inside of the same parent. And that is so important, I think, to recognize that and to acknowledge it, rather than just expecting the parent to parent. And, when parents often get messages from professionals like, well, you've got to control that child.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or, in reports, well, the parent is unable to control the child. And of course, we know from NVR that you cannot control another person anyway. We speak of the illusion of control. But if we don't acknowledge the nature of distress in a parent, if we don't legitimize that distress, then we fall short of really connecting with the parent in the NVR process, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, going back to the A word, the avoidance, maybe the driver for the parents to not avoid is about meeting that young person's needs, so those emotional, physical needs that a parent wants to offer their child. That love, that warmth, that replenishing, that nourishing is the driver to not avoid. But of course, that one part of the parent who wants to connect with their child and meet the child's unmet needs, and at the same time feel afraid of the young person.
Yeah.
You know, I just imagine the parent constantly finding themselves wanting to care and love for their child, but then wants to avoid them. That crossover, that living with that position.
We need to acknowledge a real ambivalence inside of the parent, and we need to appreciate that rather than pathologize the parent. And how do you avoid and not avoid at the same time? How do you do that? And I was thinking of a book I read, oh my goodness, more than 40 years ago.
Oh, please don't say you remember what a book said in 40 years ago.
I don't remember all of what was in that.
You put my memory to shame when you do this.
But you see, I don't remember names, so there, you know. But in the book, the author used an example of how symptoms develop. And in this example or thought experiment, you're a shy person, okay? And you don't like to talk to strangers very much if you don't have to. And you're sitting on the plane.
No, this is exactly me.
Huh?
This is exactly me.
It's exactly you. Well, then maybe you can really empathize with this bloke in the example. So this person sits on the plane, you know, and of course the seat is assigned. You can't change your seat, right? Next to someone who's really talkative, you know, and keeps talking to you. And you're polite, of course. You're not just shy, but you're polite. So when you're spoken to, you feel you need to respond in some shape or form, you know. So perhaps you answer with a few words, and you're even thinking about, have I said enough not to be impolite, you know. Can I avoid saying anything that might entice that person to speak even more? But it's totally irrelevant because that guy keeps talking and asking you questions and this, that, or the other. So what do? Well, you pull out a newspaper. You pretend that you're reading the newspaper.
The safety instructions on the aeroplane.
Or the safety instructions on the airplane, or the onboard shop.
The
menu or the duty free or whatever. Of course, our talkative friend won't stick to your nonverbal request that they be quiet. He will lean over and he'll point and say, yeah, they played really badly, the Chicago Cubs. You know, what do you think? You know, shouldn't they have, you know? Oh gosh. So that strategy doesn't work either. So let me ask you, Rachel, as someone who can empathize with the rather quiet, more introvert guy on the plane, what do you then do? What strategy do you choose then?
So pre or post NVR, pre-NVR, I would have thrown the guy off the plane somehow.
Oh, you would have escalated.
Post, I get up and move. I'll just stand in the walkway.
Now let me tie you down a little more. You can't get up and move because the plane is booked. There are no free seats on the plane.
I'm going to now revert to pretending to be asleep.
Exactly. That was exactly what happened in the story. You pretend to be asleep. So the author of this book, Václavic, said this is the prototype of a symptom. It's actually a solution. It's actually a solution to a dilemma. And I'm just thinking of some of the parents we work with who have experienced terrible abuse, who find that old feelings resurface very quickly, very easily when their children seem to mirror such past abuse, who need to stay in the physical proximity of the child and at the same time feel the need to survive psychologically, emotionally. And they then appear to be distant, distracted, sleep, maybe drink alcohol, maybe smoke a lot of cannabis. Yeah. So they do something to try and cope, to try and cope. And then that may be perceived as neglectful. And they become stigmatized. And then on the layer of trauma, it sort of adds a layer of shame in the wider system. So I think part of the thing is that we need, as NVR practitioners, we need to appreciate that ambivalence and what happens with that ambivalence. We need to perhaps appreciate that other professionals might not always be aware of that, or not fully, or not perhaps be attuned to the parents to such a degree that they can really fully appreciate it, because they take a very child-centered view.
Yeah, I see that a lot and hear that a lot. I just one thought sprang to mind. There was a referral made from a local authority for a family, and the referring professional was sharing with me the family's situation and described the parent leaving the room when the young person escalated with violent behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
And the referring professional, I'm being really mindful about not giving anything away here, the referring professional described that act as highly neglectful and not being able to meet the young person's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And my head was, she was looking after herself.
Yeah.
And for me, it was so transparent and clear that the mother said, I'm leaving the room. I'm not listening to this, which is exactly what I would be talking to a parent about when those behaviours happen. Not always leaving, just without any kind of indication of why or when they're coming back. But, that would be a response. Not always, but sometimes to a harmful behaviour, and how the referring professional saw that as highly neglectful of the parent, and almost, blamed her for not being able to sit with the young person. And I questioned the referring professional as to what she expected the mother to do.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that the boy had been away from the home and it was his first day back, and that she was expected to sit with him. And I said he was being violent to her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess my tone allowed that referring professional to take stock of what she was sharing with me and change her response. However, I think it was really judgmental.
Well, but I think it's such a good example of what we do come across a lot. And I wouldn't say that the professional was almost blaming. I think she took on quite a prescriptive position.
Yeah.
She, for whatever reason, she had an understanding or a belief about what the parent should be like and what she should do. Mm-hmm. Yet she wasn't yet able to appreciate the parent's own dilemma and the parent's own ambivalence. So the parent, I guess, wants to parent this kid. She wants to welcome him home. She wants to look after him. She wants to be able to do that. But also, when she feels threatened by him, it brings up So much. And I think we discussed this referral together. And my understanding is that this mother has a history of being targeted violently, also by adults. So the terror that she must feel is intense, I guess. And actually, she was already, maybe inadvertently, she was already on the pathway to resistance by protecting herself. Because what we see in a lot of parents is that parents who've experienced serious trauma, they don't protect themselves. Yeah. Or they escalate.
Yeah. So this mother relied on her instinct. She had some instinctive response to leave the room.
Yeah.
And and then she was judged for that.
Yeah.
I feel that was quite unfair.
Well, if she listened to the professional, if she did what the professional expects of her in the future, she would end up in that airplane seat. She would end up in that position of being terrified by the child, not being able to escape physically, because here she's thinking, oh, I've been told I'm neglectful if I leave the room. But then she would need to escape psychologically. So she would need to become dissociative, or she would need to look at the ceiling, or she would need to distract herself. Maybe she would need to go on her phone. I don't know what she would do. Maybe she would need to drink, which would get her into further trouble in terms of child protection. So really, your job in that instance, it seems to me, wasn't so much, well, you weren't working with the parent yet anyway, but it wasn't so much any intervention with the parent. It was actually a response to the professional who was making the referral, because in doing so, you were beginning to change the system around the parent. And I'm just thinking, maybe the professional has been trained to think in a purely child-centered way and not a parent-centered way. So maybe if you're trained to think in a purely child-centered way, maybe you want to end up utilizing the parent for the child's benefit without really taking the experience of the person of the parent into account. Maybe it doesn't occur to you to do that. So actually, our job as NVR practitioners is then to help that other professional become aware of the person of the parent in that instance. Okay, so I guess, where did we get to at the end of our podcast? What's the conclusion?
I guess what I feel is rewriting the way that professionals are trained so that they become more parent-centered. Well, I guess to understand that each person holds a different position and that they are, but some professionals, then their intention is not to disregard or minimize parental presence. They're just thinking from a different position, and I need to be more. I think I need to be less protective of the parents I work with. I do. I feel quite aggrieved. I notice something inside me when it happens. I feel very protective of parents and their trauma and what they've experienced and how that needs to be understood.
So it is our job in the NVR process, when we think of parental trauma, to create space for the understanding of the experience of the parent. So child focus and parent-centered responses. And then look at how the solutions that the parent chooses and that we support the parent to pursue, how they fit into the wider picture of the parent recovering from their own trauma.
So beautifully said, Mr. Jakob.
Okay.
I got your hair.
We've just had another really long podcast today.
30 minutes. So what's happened to our 20-minute quick ones?
I don't know.
Minutes. Okay. Well, I hope whoever's listening enjoys.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.